At first glance it looks perfect. A frozen moment from a simpler time. Smiling faces arranged neatly in a grid. Bright colors. Feathered hair. That unmistakable warmth of a family that feels almost too good to be real. Everything about it screams comfort. Everything about it says, nothing could possibly be wrong. But look closer. Not casually. Not the way you've seen it 100 times before. Really look. Because hidden inside one of the most iconic television intros of all time is a mistake. A strange, almost unbelievable moment that slipped past producers, editors, and an entire network, and somehow made it into millions of homes over and over again for years. And the weirdest part? Most people never noticed. Even now, decades later, viewers still miss it the first time. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's quick. It's subtle. And it completely shatters the illusion of perfection that defined one of the most wholesome shows ever created. This is the story of the Brady Bunch blooper that hid in plain sight and became a legend. Because behind the smiles, behind the laughter, behind the carefully crafted image of the perfect American family, something went wrong. And no one stopped it. To understand why this moment is so bizarre, you have to understand what the Brady Bunch was supposed to be. It wasn't just a sitcom. It was an idea. A carefully constructed version of family life where everything worked out, where problems were solved in under 30 minutes, and where love and understanding always won in the end. When the show first premiered in 1969, it didn't seem revolutionary. In fact, it barely made a splash at all. Critics dismissed it. Ratings were average. It wasn't edgy, it wasn't groundbreaking, and it certainly wasn't trying to be. But that was the point. While other shows pushed boundaries, the Brady Bunch leaned into something different. Comfort. Stability. A version of family life that felt safe in a world that, at the time, was anything but. Week after week, viewers were invited into a home where 6 kids from 2 different families somehow blended together without chaos, where disagreements turned into lessons, and where even the biggest problems felt small by the end of the episode. It was polished, controlled, carefully designed. And nowhere was that more obvious than in the opening credits. That grid. 9 squares. 9 faces. Each one perfectly timed, perfectly positioned, turning to look at one another as if they were part of a seamless, synchronized dance. It looked effortless. But it wasn't. Every movement was planned. Every glance was choreographed. The entire sequence was meant to represent unity, connection, family. And yet, right in the middle of that perfect illusion, something slipped. It happens in less than a second. So fast that your brain almost doesn't register it. You're watching the sequence. The music is playing. The faces are turning one by one like a visual rhythm you've seen your whole life. Then suddenly, it happens. Marcia turns. Her arm lifts naturally, casually as part of the movement. And in that exact moment, her elbow connects. Not gently. Not subtly. Directly into Cindy's face. It's not staged. It's not scripted. It's not part of the choreography. It's a mistake. A real, physical, undeniable accident. Caught on camera. Cindy's reaction is immediate. Her head jerks slightly. There's a flicker, just a split-second flinch that breaks the illusion completely. And then, it's over. The sequence continues like nothing happened. No pause. No correction. No retake. Just smiles. Here's the part that makes it even stranger. They kept it. Not just once. Not as a hidden outtake. They left it in the final version of the opening credits. Which means it played at the start of every single episode. For years. Think about that. In a show built on perfection, where every detail was carefully managed, where even minor continuity errors were usually avoided, a visible, physical blooper made it into the most replayed part of the entire series. And no one stopped it. Maybe they didn't notice. That's possible. Editing wasn't as precise back then as it is today. There were no instant replays, no digital zoom, no frame-by-frame analysis. If something looked good enough, it often passed. But this wasn't just a background detail. It was right there. Front and center. So maybe they did notice. Maybe they saw it and chose to ignore it. Maybe reshooting the sequence wasn't worth the time or cost. Maybe they assumed no one would ever catch it. Or maybe, just maybe, they thought it added something. Because as strange as it sounds, that tiny accidental moment did something the show rarely allowed. Made it real. For a split second, the Brady family wasn't perfect. They weren't a carefully constructed image of harmony and balance. They were just siblings. A big sister moving too fast. A younger sister caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. A completely normal, completely human moment. hidden inside a world that tried so hard to be ideal. And that's why it stuck. Because even though the show was built on perfection, audiences connected with the imperfection. But that wasn't the only time reality slipped through the cracks. Far from it. The Brady Bunch may have looked polished on the surface, but behind the scenes, it was just like any other production, full of rushed schedules, technical limitations, and human error. And sometimes, those errors made it onto the screen. If you pay close attention, you'll start to notice them. A shadow where it shouldn't be. A microphone dipping into frame for just a moment. A set wall that doesn't quite line up the way it should. In one scene, a boom mic briefly appears above the actors in the kitchen, so quick that most viewers miss it, but obvious once you know where to look. In another, props seem to move on their own between cuts. A glass shifts position. A book disappears. A chair is suddenly somewhere else entirely. These weren't intentional. They were the result of a fast-moving production trying to keep up with weekly deadlines. Continuity wasn't always perfect. It couldn't be. Haircuts changed mid-scene. Clothes looked different from one angle to the next. Characters would walk into a room wearing one thing, and leave wearing something slightly different. And then there were the physical bloopers. Moments you couldn't plan, and couldn't always fix. A door that refused to open. A prop that didn't work the way it was supposed to. An actor missing their mark, or reacting just a little too late. In one memorable scene, a sliding door jams unexpectedly, forcing the actors to awkwardly struggle with it while staying in character. They don't break. They don't stop. They just push through it. Because sometimes, there was no time for another take. And then there were the kids. 6 young actors, expected to memorize lines, hit marks, and deliver performances with precision. Most of the time they did. But they were still kids. They forgot lines. They laughed at the wrong moments. They reacted in ways that weren't scripted. And sometimes, those moments stayed. A slight smile during a serious scene. A pause that feels a little too long. A reaction that feels just a little too real. These weren't polished performances. They were human ones. Even the adults weren't immune. Behind the scenes, not everything was as perfect as it appeared on screen. Robert Reed, who played the calm and steady Mike Brady, was a classically trained actor. He had a deep respect for serious storytelling, and he didn't always agree with the tone of the show. He thought some of the scripts were too unrealistic, too simplistic. And while he remained professional on camera, off-screen there were tensions. Disagreements about direction, about dialogue, about what the show should be. But you'd never know it watching him. Because when the cameras rolled, the illusion stayed intact. That's the strange duality of the Brady Bunch. On the surface it was flawless. But underneath, it was just as messy, unpredictable, and human as any real family. And maybe that's why it lasted. Not because it was perfect, but because, in small, almost invisible ways, it wasn't. Over time the show found a second life. It didn't dominate ratings during its original run. It wasn't considered groundbreaking. But in reruns, something changed. New audiences discovered it. Kids who hadn't grown up with it suddenly found themselves drawn to its simplicity, its warmth, its sense of stability. It became comfort viewing. Familiar. Reliable. Timeless. And with that came something unexpected. People started watching more closely. Not just for the stories, but for the details. The little things. The moments that didn't quite fit. And that's when the bloopers became part of the experience. Not mistakes to ignore, but hidden gems to discover. The house itself became iconic. That warm, inviting space that felt like the center of everything, even though in reality it didn't quite make sense. The exterior was a real home. The interior was a set. The layout didn't match. The architecture didn't line up. But none of that mattered. Because it felt real. The theme song became unforgettable. A simple story told in a few lines that instantly pulled you into the world. And that grid, the 9 squares that introduced each character, became one of the most recognizable openings in television history. Which makes that tiny blooper even more incredible. Because it wasn't hidden in a random scene. It was embedded in the most watched, most repeated part of the entire show. And decades later, it's still there. Unchanged. Unedited. Waiting to be noticed. That's the thing about moments like this. They don't fade. They don't disappear. They become part of the legacy. A reminder that even the most polished, carefully constructed worlds are built by real people, capable of real mistakes. And sometimes, those mistakes become the most memorable part of all. So the next time you see that photo, that perfectly arranged grid of smiling faces, don't just glance at it. Look closer. Watch carefully. Because hidden inside that moment of perfection is a split second of chaos. A blink and you miss it accident that somehow survived decades of television history. And once you see it, you'll never watch it the same way again. Because perfection isn't what made the Brady Bunch timeless. It's the fact that every now and then, it wasn't perfect at all.